She pointed at him, like he was a piece of luggage someone forgot to check. "Remove him now." The entire business class cabin went dead silent. A little girl grabbed her father's hand so hard, her knuckles turned white. That single command delivered, without blinking, without guilt, without even looking at the boarding pass, would unravel one of the most powerful women in the room. And it would shut down an entire aircraft at Gate 14, John F. Kennedy International Airport, on an ordinary Tuesday morning. But nobody knew that yet. Drop a comment with your city right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss where this goes. The morning Daniel Brooks chose to wear his old jacket was not an accident. He had 3 suits hanging in his closet. 2 of them still had the dry cleaning tags on. His assistant had laid out a pressed gray blazer the night before, the kind of thing he usually wore when he traveled. But when Daniel looked at it that morning, standing in the hallway with the lights still dim, and Lily still asleep in the next room, he just didn't reach for it. He reached for the jacket instead. The brown one. The one with the faded left elbow and the small tear near the second button that he kept meaning to fix. The one he'd worn the day he drove Lily home from the hospital 3 years ago when she was recovering from surgery. The one he'd worn at the cemetery. He didn't know why. He just knew that today was not a day for armor. Today was about Lily. He zipped her backpack himself. He double-checked the medical folder, the one with her allergy documentation, her pediatrician's contact information, and the letter from her school explaining the enrollment timeline. He packed her favorite book, the one about a girl who builds her own rocket ship. He packed 2 granola bars and a small thermos of warm apple cider because she always said airplane air made her throat dry. He did everything the way her mother used to do it. Careful, quiet, thorough. When Lily came padding down the hallway in her socks, hair still messy from sleep, dragging her little purple roller bag, she looked up at him with those dark eyes that were entirely her mother's, and said, "Dad, are we really going?" "We're really going," Daniel said. She didn't hug him. She just leaned against his arm for a moment, the way she did when words weren't enough, and he let her stay there for exactly as long as she needed. Then they got in the car. Daniel Brooks had built his company from nothing. Not from nothing the way people say it when they mean, "I had a little help, but worked hard." From actual nothing. From a 1-bedroom apartment in Newark, where he wrote code on a second-hand laptop while working double shifts at a warehouse on the weekends. From a time when he couldn't afford to fail because failure didn't just mean losing money, it meant losing everything, including the life he was trying to build for the woman he loved. He and Rachel had met in community college. She was studying nursing. He was taking night classes in computer science and spending his days trying to convince investors that a 24-year-old with no Ivy League degree and no family connections had a real idea worth betting on. Most of them said no. Rachel never did. She believed in him before he believed in himself. She sat across from him at kitchen tables covered in papers and spreadsheets and told him, plainly, that his instincts were right. That the airline industry's reservation security infrastructure was fragile and outdated, and that someone was going to build the solution. It might as well be him. She was the one who named the company. He was the one who made it real. By the time Lily was born, they had their first major contract. By the time Lily could walk, they were operating in 11 countries. By the time Lily started 2nd grade, Daniel's technology was quietly running in the background of more than 40 airlines worldwide, verifying passenger identity, flagging unauthorized record changes, protecting the integrity of every confirmed booking on every flight those airlines operated. Nobody who saw him in the airport that morning knew any of that. They saw the jacket. JFK was loud the way it always was on Tuesday mornings, that particular brand of organized chaos where everyone was moving fast and nobody was making eye contact. Daniel kept one hand on Lily's shoulder as they moved through the terminal, her purple bag rolling behind her, his backpack on one shoulder. They checked in without incident. Security was smooth. They had time. So, Daniel bought Lily a hot chocolate at the little cafe near Gate 14. They sat together at a small table while she read 2 chapters turquoise. Chetsteer, her rocketship book, and he answered 3 emails on his phone and pretended he wasn't watching the clock. "Dad," she said without looking up from her book. "Yeah. Is it going to be a big plane? Bigger than the one we took to see Grandma?" She turned a page. "Do they have real pillows in business class or the fake ones?" "Real ones," he said, "I think." "You think?" "I'm told they're real." "By who?" "By the person who books my flights." She looked up then, suspicious in the way only a 9-year-old can be. "You've never flown business class?" "Not with you." That landed differently than he intended. She looked back at her book, but her expression had changed, something soft and in it that made his chest tighten. He'd been working for so long, so hard, so many flights alone, so many hotel rooms, so many dinners, where he sat across from executives and talked about systems and contracts and quarterly projections. And Lily had been at home with her grandmother or at school, or doing homework, on video calls, while he watched her from a screen 6 time zones away. This trip was different. This trip was for her. They boarded the flight at 7:42 a.m. The gate agent smiled at Lily. Lily smiled back and showed her boarding pass proudly, holding it with both hands the way small children hold important documents. They walked down the jet bridge, Lily's roller bag clunking rhythmically over the riddle, and Daniel let her lead the way because she wanted to. They were looking for seats 12A and 12B, window and middle, business class. Exactly what he'd booked 4 months ago. He'd selected them specifically the window for Lily so she could watch the city disappear beneath. The clouds, the middle seat, so he could be right there beside her. He'd paid full price. Not miles. Not upgrade points. Cash. Because this was not a business trip he was expensing. This was a promise he was keeping. When they entered the cabin, Daniel took one look at row 12 and stopped. Someone was already sitting in 12A. A woman, mid-50s. Polished in a way that was not accidental. It was constructed, maintained, projected. She wore a pale ivory blazer with gold buttons and a watch that Daniel recognized as worth more than people's monthly mortgage. Her carry-on had been placed in the overhead compartment with military precision. Her reading glasses were already on. She had the posture of a person who had never once in her life been told to wait. She looked up when Daniel and Lily stopped at the row. She looked at Lily first, then at Daniel, then at the jacket. Her expression did not change. But something behind her eyes did a kind of rapid, unconscious assessment that took less than 3 seconds and arrived at a conclusion that had nothing to do with facts. Daniel held up his boarding pass. "I think you might be in our seats," he said. "12A and 12B. The woman's eyes moved to his boarding pass for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. "There must be a mistake," she said. Her voice was smooth and certain. The voice of someone who had been right in every room she had ever entered. "I was specifically assigned this seat by the airline's VIP coordination team." "I understand," Daniel said. "But this is what my boarding pass shows. Can we just check with the crew?" She turned slightly toward the aisle and raised one hand, the gesture precise and imperious, the kind of hand raise that expects immediate response. A flight attendant appeared within seconds. Her name tag read Brenda. She was young, mid-20s, maybe, and she had that particular expression of someone who had learned to read a cabin very quickly and adjust her attention accordingly. "Is there a problem?" Brenda asked. She directed the question, Daniel noticed, at the woman in the seat. Not at him. "This gentleman seems to think he has my seat," the woman said. "These seats," Daniel said calmly. 12A and 12B. For myself and my daughter." He extended the boarding pass. "Here's the confirmation." Brenda looked at the boarding pass. She looked at the woman. She looked at the boarding pass again. "Ma'am," she said to the woman, "can I see your boarding pass?" The woman opened her bag, retrieved a slim leather document holder, and produced a boarding pass with the unhurried confidence of someone who already knew they were right. Brenda looked at it. Something flickered across her face, a micro-expression, a half-second of recognition that whatever she was seeing was complicated. "One moment," she said. "Let me get my supervisor." The supervisor's name was Michael Reed. He walked up the aisle with the stride of a man who had handled 1,000 of these situations and was already tired of this one before it began. He was heavy-set, late 40s, with the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd been on his feet since 5 in the morning. He looked at both boarding passes. He looked at the woman. He looked at Daniel. And something in his posture shifted, the kind of shift that isn't about the paperwork at all. "Mr. Brooks," he said, reading the name. "I apologize for the confusion. We're going to need to address a seating reassignment." Daniel felt Lily's hand tighten around his fingers. "A reassignment," he said. "Yes, sir. We have an operational situations." "What operational situation?" Michael paused. "There's a system issue with the reservation. We're going to need to move you to a different section of the aircraft." Daniel looked at him steadily. "I bought these seats 4 months ago. I have a confirmed booking. Can you show me the system record that indicates there's a conflict?" "Sir, we don't typically." "I'm not asking you to print it. I'm asking you to show me the screen." Another pause. Longer this time. "I understand your frustration," Michael said, and his voice had shifted into that particular register, smooth, practiced, politely immovable, that Daniel recognized as a performance. "But we need to resolve this quickly so we can prepare for departure. I'm going to ask you and your daughter to come with me." "Where?" "We'll find you alternative seating." "In business class?" The pause that followed was half a second too long. "We'll do our best," Michael said. Daniel looked at him. He looked at Brenda. He looked at the woman in seat 12A, who had reopened her magazine and was examining it with the determined concentration of someone pretending not to listen. Then he looked down at Lily. She was watching him. Her dark eyes were steady, but her jaw was tight the way it got when she was trying not to cry and absolutely refusing to. He squeezed her hand once. "My daughter and I are not going to be separated," he said. His voice was quiet, not aggressive, just flat and clear and final. "Whatever happens next, we stay together." "Of course," Michael said. "Of course, no one's separating you." "Good," Daniel said. "Then let's figure this out right here." That was when Victoria Harrington spoke again. She set her magazine down with the delicate precision of a woman who wanted everyone to know she was making a choice. "You know," she said, not looking at Daniel, directing her words toward Michael, "I really don't understand why this is taking so long. This is business class. The airline knows who I am. And frankly," now she did look at Daniel, just briefly, just enough, "I think it would be better for everyone if you found this man somewhere in the back." The cabin had gone quiet. Not library quiet, that charged, electric quiet where everyone is listening, and nobody wants to admit they're listening. A man in 11A shifted slightly in his seat. A woman across the aisle looked at her phone. Someone in 13B adjusted their headphones. Nobody said a word. Daniel turned to look at Victoria Harrington with an expression that gave away nothing. "I'm sorry," he said. "Did you just say the back?" Victoria tilted her head slightly. "I meant the coach section. There's nothing personal about it." "Of course not," Daniel said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to Michael. "I'd like to see the reservation record. Right now." "Sir, my name is Daniel Brooks. My daughter is Lily Brooks. We have a confirmed booking in seats 12A and 12B. The booking was made through your airline's own website 4 months ago. I have the email confirmation, the seat selection receipt, and the credit card charge. And unless someone can show me a legitimate operational reason why those seats are no longer ours, I am not going anywhere." The silence stretched. Michael looked at him, then at Victoria, then back at Daniel. Victoria said, in a voice that carried the calm authority of someone who had never been told no in a professional setting, "Michael, move him." And that was the moment, that single sentence. Not loud, not dramatic, just utterly certain of its own power. Move him. Like Daniel was a bag. Like Lily wasn't standing right there, holding her boarding pass with both hands. Like the jacket meant something about who had rights and who didn't. Michael turned back to Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, I need you to come with me now." And Daniel said, "No." The word landed in the cabin like something solid. A few passengers looked up. The woman across the aisle had stopped pretending to look at her phone. The man in 11A was watching openly now. "Sir," Michael said, lowering his voice, "I need you to understand that if you refuse to cooperate—" "I'm cooperating," Daniel said. "I'm standing here calmly asking you to follow the airline's own policy." You cannot remove a confirmed passenger from an assigned seat without a documented, legitimate reason. What is the reason? Michael's jaw was tight. Operational necessity. That's a category, not a reason. What is the specific operational necessity? I'm not able to discuss the specifics, then I'm not able to move. Victoria made a small sound, not a laugh, not quite, but something in that neighborhood. Oh, for heaven's sake. She reached into her bag and produced a business card, which she handed to Michael without looking at it. Call whoever you need to call. I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I've flown 200,000 miles with this airline this year alone. Whatever this is, it needs to be resolved in the next 5 minutes. Michael took the card. He looked at it, he took a breath, and then he made his mistake. He reached toward the tablet mounted near the crew station, tapped through several screens, and entered something. It was a quick action, almost routine looking. But Daniel was watching. Daniel was always watching, and his eyes caught what Michael's hands were doing. Wait, Daniel said. Michael's hand paused. What did you just enter? I'm processing the reassignment. That wasn't processing a reassignment, Daniel said. His voice had changed. Not louder, but sharper, more precise. That was a record modification. You changed something in the passenger database. Michael stared at him. Show me the screen, Daniel said. Sir, I'm not able to. Show me the screen or I stop this flight. Victoria laughed then. A short, incredulous sound. Oh, this is absurd. You don't have the authority to stop a flight. Daniel looked at her for one long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. He didn't make a call. Not yet. He just held the phone. And he looked at Michael Reed with the expression of a man who had just made a decision and was now waiting for the other person to understand what that decision meant. Let me explain something to you, Daniel said quietly. I know what that system looks like from the inside. I know what a voluntary record change looks like. I know what an unauthorized modification looks like. And I know which one you just entered. Michael's face had gone still. I'm asking you one more time, Daniel said. Show me the screen. The cabin was absolutely silent now. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft seemed to have gone somewhere else. Lily was standing very still beside her father. She wasn't looking at Victoria. She wasn't looking at Michael. She was looking at her dad, and her expression was something complicated fear. Yes, but beneath it something else. Something steadier. She had seen this version of her father before. Not often, but once or twice. When things were wrong and needed to be made right, she had watched him become this version of himself that was still quiet, still calm, still entirely in control, but with something underneath the calm that was not soft at all. She had once asked him, after a difficult meeting she'd accidentally overheard, what that feeling was. He had said, "It's what happens when you know you're right and you're not afraid of what comes next." She had thought about that for a long time. She thought about it again now. Michael looked at the phone in Daniel's hand. He looked at Daniel. He looked at Victoria. He took a breath. "Sir," he said, and his voice had gone carefully neutral, in the way voices do when someone is buying time they don't have. "If you can just come with me to the front." "I am not leaving this row," Daniel said, "and I am not having a private conversation with you. Whatever needs to happen next happens here." Brenda had come back. She was standing slightly behind Michael, and Daniel noticed that she looked uncomfortable, not the uncomfortable of someone being inconvenienced, but the uncomfortable of someone who knows something is wrong and doesn't know what to do about it. He caught her eye for just a second. She looked away. He cataloged that too. "Dad," Lily said softly. He looked down at her. "I'm okay," she said. It broke his heart a little, the way she said it. She was telling him she was okay. She was 9 years old, and she was steadying him. He held her gaze for a moment and gave her the smallest nod. "I know you are," he said. "So am I." He looked back at Michael. "Here's what's going to happen," Daniel said. "Either you show me the reservation record and we resolve this correctly, or I make a phone call. Your choice. You have about 30 seconds. Victoria Harrington stood up. It was a deliberate movement, not angry, not rushed. She rose from the seat the way powerful people rise when they've decided to end something. She buttoned her jacket. She addressed Michael directly, her voice low and controlled. "I don't know who this person thinks he is," she said, "but I have a meeting in San Francisco at noon, and I am not going to be held up by a scene in coach clothing." "Handle this, ma'am," Michael said. "I understand. I don't want understanding. I want this resolved." "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Brooks, my daughter and I are not moving," Daniel said. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'm going to need to call airport security." Daniel looked at him. "Call them," he said. Something in the certainty of that response stopped Michael completely. He had expected resistance. He had not expected that. Not that tone. Not that stillness. Brenda touched Michael's arm. She leaned in and said something low. Michael listened. His expression shifted. "Excuse me," Michael said, and walked to the front of the cabin. What happened next took 11 minutes. Daniel kept count. During those 11 minutes, he stood in the aisle of the business cabin with Lily's hand in his. He did not sit down. He did not look at his phone. He stood and waited, because his standing there, in the aisle, in front of the row, was itself a statement. The passengers around them had settled into an uneasy stillness. A few were watching openly now. The woman across the aisle had put her phone completely away and was just watching. Not unkindly, but watching. Victoria had returned to the seat. She had her magazine open again. Her posture was impeccable. Her expression was sealed. At minute 4, Lily tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" "No." "Is she in trouble?" He glanced at Victoria. "Possibly. Is that why you're not leaving?" He considered. "Partly. Mostly I'm not leaving because these are our seats and we have every right to be here." Lily thought about this. "But you also know something, don't you? You got that look." "What look?" "The one where you're being calm, but you're actually not calm at all." He almost smiled. "I'm completely calm, Dad." "Lily." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know who she is, don't you?" Lily said. "Not a question." "I know who she thinks she is," Daniel said. Lily processed that. "Is that different?" "It's very different," he said. "And she's about to find that out." At minute 8, a different crew member appeared, a woman in a more formal jacket, older, with the bearing of someone who carried actual authority and did not need to announce it. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Lily. She looked at the seat. She looked at Michael, who had returned, looking like a man who had received information he wished he hadn't. "Mr. Brooks," the senior crew member said. Her name tag read Carol. "I'm so sorry for the delay. Can I ask, are you?" She stopped, looked at him again. "Forgive me, I just want to confirm, are you with Brooks Aviation Systems?" Victoria Harrington's magazine lowered 1 inch. Daniel said, "I'm the founder." "Yes." Carol absorbed this with the controlled professionalism of someone who had just understood the full dimension of a situation in a single second. "I see," she said. "I haven't mentioned that because it's not relevant," Daniel said. "What's relevant is that I have 2 confirmed seats and a modified record that I did not authorize." "I understand," Carol said. "And I owe you an apology. We're going to need to pause boarding for a few minutes while we address this." "I appreciate that," Daniel said. Victoria's magazine was now all the way down. She was looking at Daniel, really looking at him for the first time. And Daniel looked back at her, not with triumph, not with anger, just with the steady, even expression of a man who had known exactly where he stood from the beginning, and had simply waited for everyone else to catch up. Lily tugged his sleeve again. "Dad." "Yeah." She kept her voice very low. "Is it over?" He thought about the record modification. He thought about the investigation that would follow. Breo. He thought about the other passengers who had been through something like this and hadn't been standing next to a phone with the right number in it. "This part," he said. "Yeah, this part is over. What about the other parts?" He looked at her mother's eyes in her father's face, at the purple roller bag. She was still holding, at the boarding pass she had never once let go of during the entire 11 minutes they'd been standing in that aisle. "We'll talk about the other parts on the plane," he said. "After we get to our seats." She nodded, straightened up. "Okay," she said. "Good." And she walked to seat 12B, like she'd always known it was hers. Because it was. Because it always had been. Daniel stood in the aisle a moment longer. He looked at his seat, 12A, still occupied. He looked at Michael Reed. He looked at Brenda, who was looking at the floor. He looked at Victoria Harrington, who was looking at him with an expression he could not entirely read, part calculation, part confusion, part the first faint beginning of something else. He said nothing. He sat down in seat 12A, and he buckled his seatbelt, and he waited, because what happened next was not his to stop. It was the system doing what it was built to do. His system, the one he had built precisely so that when someone tried to make the truth disappear, when someone tried to erase a confirmed record and pretend it had never existed, there would be something there, quiet and certain and impossible to override, that said, "No, that's not what happened. Here is what really happened. And now everyone is going to know." The doors were still open. That was the first thing Daniel noticed when he settled into seat 12A. The jet bridge was still connected. The aircraft had not pushed back. And in the front galley, he could hear voices, low, urgent, the particular cadence of people having a conversation they did not want overheard. Lily had opened her book, or she was pretending to. Daniel could tell the difference. When she was actually reading, her eyes moved. Right now they were still, fixed on the same line, and her left thumb was working a small circle on the edge of the page, the way it did when she was thinking hard about something. He let her be. He looked out the window at the tarmac. A fuel truck was moving slowly in the distance. Ground crew in orange vests were about their work with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done the same thing 1,000 mornings in a row. The sky was the kind of flat gray that promised nothing dramatic, just a cold Tuesday in November, just another departure, just another ordinary morning that had no idea it was about to become anything but. Victoria Harrington had not spoken since Carol arrived. She was in the seat directly across the aisle. She'd been moved there, quietly and without ceremony, while Daniel and Lily were settling in. No one had explained it. No one had apologized for it. Michael Reed had simply appeared at her elbow and said something in a low voice, and Victoria had looked at the seat, then at Daniel, then stood and moved without a word. That wordlessness told Daniel everything. She was recalculating. He recognized the behavior. He had seen it in boardrooms. The moment when someone realizes the landscape has changed and goes very quiet while they figure out what the new map looks like. It wasn't retreat. Not yet. It was stillness before a different kind of pressure. He was not afraid of that pressure, but he was watching for it. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." She still hadn't looked up from the non-reading. "That lady is staring at you." "I know." "Are you going to say something to her?" "No." "Are you going to look at her?" "No." Lily turned a page she hadn't read. "Good," she said quietly. "Don't give her the satisfaction." He looked at his daughter then, and felt something catch in his chest. 9 years old. She had her mother's instincts and his stubbornness, and some third thing that belonged entirely to herself, some quality he did not have a word for yet, but recognized every time it surfaced. "When did you get so smart?" he said. "I've always been this smart," she said. "You just travel a lot." He didn't have an answer to that, so he said nothing, and she went back to her page, and he went back to watching the door. It was still open, and something was coming through it. He could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. Not a sound exactly, not a sight, just a change in pressure, a shift in the quality of the air around the gate. He picked up his phone. He did not make a call. He opened a very specific application, one that most people had never heard of, one that had no public-facing interface, one that operated entirely in the background of systems that moved millions of passengers around the world every single day. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. Then he closed the application and set the phone face down on his tray table and folded his hands and waited. 11 seconds later, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're going to ask for your patience for a few additional minutes before departure. We've received a brief operational hold from ground control and will have you updated as soon as we have more information. We appreciate your understanding." The cabin stirred. The particular restlessness of people who were already on the clock, connecting flights, meeting schedules, lives arranged around departure times strangely uncertain. A man 3 rows back said loudly, "Are you kidding me?" Someone else groaned. A child near the back started asking why they weren't moving yet, and Victoria Harrington, across the aisle, turned her head very slowly and looked at Daniel. He could feel her eyes on the side of his face. He did not turn. Mr. Brooks. Her voice was different now, still controlled, but the certainty was gone from it, replaced by something more careful, more deliberate, like a person choosing every word with the specific awareness that they might need to account for it later. He turned. She had her reading glasses off. She was looking at him directly, and for the first time since she had pointed at him like luggage, she looked like a human being having a difficult moment rather than a force of nature having an inconvenient one. "I'd like to understand," she said. "What exactly is happening?" "I imagine you would," Daniel said. "I was told there was a system issue." "There is. Is it something you caused?" He looked at her steadily. "I didn't cause anything. I flagged something that someone else caused." She absorbed this. "And the hold?" "When a passenger record is modified without authorization," Daniel said, his voice even and explanatory, "not unkind, the system is supposed to catch it. Sometimes it does automatically. Sometimes it needs a human to alert it." He paused. "I alerted it." The silence between them was dense. "Who are you?" Victoria said. It was not a rude question. For the first time, it was a genuine one. "I'm a man who bought 2 seats 4 months ago," Daniel said. "That's really all that matters right now." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her hands, then looked back at him with an expression that was to be composed and not entirely succeeding. "I want you to know," she started. "Miss Harrington." His voice was not cold. It was just complete. A sentence that was done before she finished hers. "Whatever you want me to know, I'd like you to hold on to it for now. There are people coming onto this aircraft in about 4 minutes, and I think we should both wait and see what they have to say before we have any other conversations." She stared at him. 4 minutes, she repeated. "Give or take," Daniel said. He turned back to the window. Across the aisle, he heard her set her reading glasses down on the tray with a small, precise click. He counted to 12 before the footsteps started at the front of the jet bridge. He'd been off by 43 seconds. Not bad. The first person through the forward door was a man in a dark suit with a lanyard badge that caught the cabin light as he moved. Behind him came a woman, late 40s, dark hair pulled back, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had not walked into a room slowly in several years. Behind her came 2 more people, one of whom was speaking quietly into a phone. The cabin noticed them the way cabins notice things that don't belong to the ordinary rhythm of flight, not all at once, but in waves, row by row, heads coming up, conversations stopping. The collective awareness shifting toward the front of the aircraft, like a compass needle finding north. Michael Reed appeared from the galley. He saw the woman in the dark suit. His face did something complicated. She walked past him without stopping. She scanned the cabin once. Her eyes moved efficiently, the way trained eyes move, not dramatically, not with obvious intent, just gathering information the way breathing gathers air. Then her gaze landed on row 12 and she slowed. Daniel was looking at her. She looked back. And she stopped completely. Sarah Mitchell had been the regional director of passenger operations for 7 years. She had managed crises on 3 continents. She had handled emergency landings, security breaches, labor disputes, and one very memorable incident involving a senator and a service dog that had gone all the way to the airline's board of directors. She was not a person who was easily surprised, but right now, standing in the aisle of a delayed flight at JFK on a Tuesday morning, she looked at Daniel Brooks and her expression did something she almost did not intend for it to do. It went quiet. Not blank. Not professional. Quiet the way a room goes quiet when someone unexpected walks in and changes what the room means. She walked to row 12. She stopped at the end of the aisle, looked at him for 1 more second, and then said, "Daniel." "Sarah," he said. Lily looked up from her book. She looked at the woman. She looked at her father. She looked at the woman again. "You know her?" Lily said. "We've met," Daniel said. "Does she know who you are?" "She does now," he said. Sarah Mitchell had worked with Brooks Aviation Systems for 4 years. Their security platform had been integrated into the airline's reservation infrastructure 18 months ago. She had sat in a conference room with Daniel Brooks 3 times, had been on calls with his team dozens of times, and had reviewed the security contracts personally. She had never once seen him in anything other than a business setting, a blazer, a pressed shirt, the particular uniform of a man who moved through professional spaces with practiced authority. She had absolutely not expected to find him standing in the aisle of one of her aircraft in a worn brown jacket with a 9-year-old daughter and a situation that had just triggered a ground hold. "Can you tell me what happened?" she said. "Not to Michael. Not to the room, to Daniel," he told her, calmly, sequentially, without editorial. The seat, the boarding pass, the crew's decision, the record modification. He described what he had seen Michael enter into the system tablet. He described the timestamp. He described the specific field that had been changed. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she turned to Michael. Michael had the look of a man watching a wall fall toward him in slow motion. "Is this accurate?" she said. Michael started to speak. Carefully, Sarah said. One word. The kind of word that comes with weight attached. Michael stopped. He started again. "There was a VIP customer request," he said. Ms. Harrington indicated that she had been assigned the seat by the coordination team. "Did you verify that with the coordination team before modifying the record?" Pause. "I made a judgment call based on Michael." Sarah's voice had not risen. It had done something more effective. It had gotten precise. "Did you verify the seating assignment before modifying the record? Yes or no?" Another pause. "No," Michael said. The word dropped into the cabin like a stone into still water. Sarah turned to Brenda. "Were you present when the record was modified?" Brenda looked like she wanted to be somewhere else. "Anywhere else?" She pressed her lips together for a moment, and then she said, "Yes." "Did you raise a concern?" Another pause. Smaller this time. "I should have," Brenda said. Her voice was very quiet. Sarah nodded once. She looked at Daniel. "I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. On behalf of the airline and personally." "I appreciate that," Daniel said. "But it's not apologies I need." "I know," she said. "I know what you need." She turned to face the cabin. She stood at the front of the business section, and she spoke in a voice that was clearly audible to everyone, not because she was performing, but because she had decided that what came next should not happen in a whisper. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be transparent with you about why this aircraft has been delayed. There was a breach of passenger record protocol on this flight. A confirmed passenger's reservation was modified without authorization. We are addressing that breach right now, and the aircraft will be cleared for departure as soon as we complete this process. I apologize sincerely for the delay." The cabin was very still. Then someone near the back said, not loudly but clearly enough to carry, "What does that mean? Modified without authorization?" Sarah said, "It means a confirmed reservation was changed to benefit another passenger. That is against airline policy, against federal passenger rights regulation, and it's against everything this airline is supposed to stand for." The stillness deepened. Victoria Harrington was looking at her tray table. Michael Reed was looking at the floor. Brenda was looking at the wall. And the passengers, the ones who had watched Daniel be escorted away from his seat, the ones who had looked at the floor or their phones or their magazines, the ones who had decided silently and individually that it was not their problem, were now looking at the seat, at Daniel, at the daughter sitting beside him with a book in her lap and both boarding passes still in her hand. A woman in row 14 said quietly, "That's wrong. What they did was wrong." No one disagreed. Sarah stepped toward row 12 and spoke directly to Victoria Harrington for the first time since entering the aircraft. "Ms. Harrington, I need to ask you to gather your things." Victoria looked up. Something in her face had changed dramatically in the last 4 minutes. The architecture of certainty she had built and maintained her entire professional life had developed a visible crack, and through it came something rawer and less controlled. "I have a meeting," she started. "I understand," Sarah said. "I'll arrange a different flight, but you will not be on this one." Victoria stared at her. I'm a platinum elite status does not override passenger rights, Sarah said. Simply. Finally. Like a door closing. I'll have someone assist you at the gate. Victoria looked at Daniel. He was not watching her. He was talking quietly to Lily, who had leaned toward him, and was saying something he was answering, with a small nod. Victoria looked at Sarah. She looked at the cabin. She looked at Michael, who could not look back at her. And then Victoria Harrington did something that no one in that cabin expected. She stood. She retrieved her carry-on. She walked to the end of the row and stopped, and for a moment she stood very still, with her bag in her hand, and her jacket buttoned and her composure assembled around her, like something she was holding together through sheer force of will. Then she turned. Not toward Sarah, not toward Michael, not toward any of the crew who had helped her and would now pay a price for it. She turned toward Daniel. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The way she had not done when she first saw him, not at the jacket, not at the backpack, not at the decision she had made in 3 seconds based on what she saw instead of who he was. She looked at him, and she said, "I'm sorry." 2 words. She did not elaborate. She did not explain. She did not make it bigger or smaller than it was. She just said it, and then she walked off the plane. The jet bridge door closed behind her, with a sound that felt much larger than a door closing. Daniel looked at Lily. Lily looked at the door. Was she actually sorry? Lily said. He thought about it. I think she surprised herself, he said, which might be the beginning of sorry. Lily considered this with the particular gravity of a child evaluating a philosophical proposition. That's a really complicated answer, Dad. It's a really complicated situation. Okay, she said. I'll think about it. She opened her book. This time her eyes moved. He watched her for a moment. Then he looked forward. Sarah Mitchell was in quiet conversation with the 2 people who had come on with her. She had her phone out, typing something. The man with the lanyard badge was talking to Michael in the front galley, and from the angle of Michael's shoulders, and the way he kept running a hand across the back of his neck, the conversation was not going well for him. A passenger from row 11, the man who had watched everything with the kind of open attention of someone who has given up pretending not to lean slightly into the aisle. Hey, he said to Daniel. Daniel looked at him. The man was in his 60s. Heavy set, a giant's cap pushed back on his head, the look of someone who had spent a career doing something physical and was now retired and not entirely comfortable with it. I should have said something earlier, the man said, when they were moving you around. I didn't. He didn't explain why. He didn't offer an excuse. He just said the fact of it and left it there. Daniel looked at him for a moment. It's okay, he said. It's not, though, the man said. Daniel, no, he said. It's not. But you're saying it now. That counts for something. The man looked at him for a moment, then gave a short nod, and leaned back into his seat. From somewhere in the mid-cabin, a woman said to no one in particular, that little girl held onto the boarding passes the whole time. Did anyone notice that? The whole time. No one responded. But the cabin absorbed it, the way cabins absorb things that matter, not loudly, not demonstrably, but in the quality of the silence that followed. Lily had heard it. Daniel saw the small movement of her chin, the microlift, that meant she had registered something and was filing it away for later consideration. She did not look up from her book. He was so proud of her he could barely stand it. Sarah Mitchell came back down the aisle. She stopped at row 12 and looked at Daniel with the expression of someone who has just run a very fast calculation and arrived at the conclusion that the number is larger than they expected. We're cleared for departure, she said. I want to have a full conversation with you once we land. I'd like that, Daniel said. She looked at Lily. Is there anything I can do for you right now? Either of you? Lily looked up from her book. She studied Sarah with the frank, unfiltered assessment of a 9-year-old, which is the most honest kind of assessment there is. Are those pillows real? Lily said. In business class. Mike had said he thinks they are, but he wasn't sure. Sarah blinked. Then something happened on her face that might have been the first genuine smile anyone in that cabin had managed in the past 40 minutes. They are absolutely real, Sarah said. Good, Lily said. She looked at Daniel. Told you. You told me you didn't know either, Daniel said. I had a feeling, she said. He shook his head. He looked out the window. The jet bridge had retracted. The ground crew were moving. The engine noise was building in that particular, low, rising register that meant they were, actually, finally, going to leave. The tarmac rolled slowly past as the aircraft began to push back, and the flat gray sky opened up in front of them, wide and unresolved, full of weather it hadn't committed to yet. Daniel felt the vibration of the aircraft through the floor and through his seat and all the way up through his spine. He thought about Rachel. He thought about the way she had said, once, sitting at the kitchen table with papers everywhere and doubt written all over his face, "You're not building a product. You're building a guarantee that when someone buys a seat on a plane, that seat is theirs. Nobody can take it from them. Not money, not influence, not someone having a worse morning than them." She had tapped the laptop screen where the first draft of the security architecture was open. That's what this is. A promise. Make sure it keeps it. He had built the entire system around that. He had not thought about it that way in years. He thought about it now. Lily shifted beside him. She had put the book down back in her bag, tucked carefully, and she was looking at the window with both hands in her lap, and the expression of someone preparing for something wonderful. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, we're moving, we are. We're really going?" He looked at her mother's eyes, at the kid who had stood in that aisle for 40 minutes without letting go of the boarding passes, without crying, without asking him to just give in and make it stop. "We're really going," he said. She pressed her face to the glass, and Daniel Brooks sat back in seat 12A, his seat, the seat that had always been his, seat that no amount of money or influence or judgment based on a worn jacket could have taken, and watched his daughter's face light up as the aircraft lifted into the gray November sky. But back in the terminal at Gate 14, 3 people were having conversations that would define the next several weeks of their professional lives. Michael Reed was sitting across from an airline compliance officer who had not yet opened her notebook, watching him with the careful attention of someone who was going and some things he didn't. Brenda was in a different office, down the hall, answering similar questions, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her voice careful and her answers more complete than Michael's were going to be. And in the main terminal, Victoria Harrington was standing at a different gate, waiting for a different flight, her phone to her ear, speaking in a low and controlled voice to someone whose job it was to manage exactly this kind of situation. The situation she had created. The one that was not finished yet. Not by a long distance. Because what had happened on that aircraft was not only about a seat. It had never been about a seat. It had been about a record that someone had changed. And records once changed without authorization leave traces. Traces that a system built specifically to catch them will find, will preserve, and will present calmly, completely, without passion or agenda, to anyone who needs to see them. The aircraft was at cruising altitude now, and somewhere in the servers that Daniel's company maintained, a flag had been raised, a timestamp had been logged, and a trail of evidence was quietly assembling itself into something that would take weeks to fully understand and months to fully address. But it was there. It had been there from the moment Michael Reed entered that modification. It had been waiting. And now someone who knew exactly what it meant was on a plane headed west, sitting beside a 9-year-old girl who had fallen asleep against his arm with her face turned toward the window, her breath soft and even, her hands finally loose in her lap. He pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. She didn't wake. He looked out at the sky, the flat gray of the East Coast, giving way, somewhere ahead, to the wide open blue of the country between the coasts, and he thought about what came next. Not with anger, not with the tight satisfaction of someone who has won a fight, with something quieter and more complicated, and, if he was honest, more exhausting. Because what came next was not about him. It never had been. What came next was about every person who had ever stood in an aisle with a legitimate boarding pass and been told to move. Every family who had been separated. Every ordinary traveler who had been outranked by someone with a platinum card and the confidence that came with it. Every person who had given up their seat not because the rules required it, but because the rules had been quietly rewritten by people who assumed they could. That was what he had built the system to prevent. That was what it had failed to do this morning, until he was there to enforce it. He was going to make sure it couldn't fail that way again. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He just sat there, in the seat that had always been his, in the quiet hum of the aircraft, with his daughter breathing softly beside him, and 4 hours of flight time and the entire weight of what had just happened settling into the shape of what came next. When they landed in San Francisco, it would not be over. Not for Michael Reed. Not for Brenda. Not for the airline. Not for Victoria Harrington, who had walked off a plane for the first time in her professional life and said 2 words she had not planned to say and would spend a long time thinking about afterward. And not for Daniel. Because this was not the end of the story. This was the point in the story where you realized the story had been about something larger all along. The point where the seat stopped mattering and everything underneath the seat started to. 4 hours and 17 minutes in the air. That was how long it took for the first domino to fall. Daniel had not slept. He had not eaten the meal the flight attendant brought, though he had accepted the coffee and held it with both hands the way you hold something warm when your mind is working too hard for the rest of you eat up. Lily had slept for most of the flight, her head against his arm, her breathing slow and even and completely unbothered by everything that had happened 3 miles below the cloud line. He envied that. Not the sleep, the unbothered part. His phone had been in airplane mode since departure. Standard. Routine. The kind of discipline he had built into himself over years of international travel from the understanding that the world would still be there when he landed, that whatever was waiting in his inbox could wait 4 more hours, that the only thing that mattered between takeoff and touchdown was the altitude between him and everything else. But this morning he had taken the phone out of airplane mode at the 2-hour mark. Not because he was anxious, because he was ready. The notifications came in the order he expected them. 3 from his chief technology officer, 2 from the airline's integration team, 1 from the compliance attorney his company kept on retainer, and 1, near the bottom, from a number he did not recognize, a direct dial San Francisco area code that he noted and set aside. He read the messages in order. He typed brief, precise replies. He did not explain what had happened on the aircraft, beyond what was necessary for each person to do their specific job. He was not performing calm. He was actually calm, in the way that people are calm when they have done the hard thing and are now simply managing the aftermath. The hard thing in this case had been staying in the seat. Everything after that was process. When Lily woke up, the descent announcement had already played. She blinked, straightened, looked out the window at the Bay Area spreading below them in the late morning light, and said, with the complete clarity of someone who had just woken from genuinely restorative sleep, "Is that the ocean?" Daniel said. "Same thing. Not really. Close enough," she said. She pressed her nose to the glass. "It's big. It is. Bigger than I thought." He watched her. Most things are. She turned and looked at him with the particular expression she used when she suspected he was saying something with a second meaning. "Are we talking about the Bay?" "We're talking about the Bay," he said. "Dad." Lily. She looked at him for another second, then turned back to the window. "You're doing the thing where you say something simple, but you mean something else." "I do that all the time." "Huh. It's okay," she said. "Mom did it, too." He was quiet for a moment. "She was better at it than I am," he said. Lily didn't answer right away. Just looked at the water below them, wide and silver and indifferent to everything. Then she said very quietly, "Yeah. But you're getting better." The wheels touched down at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time. Daniel's phone showed 7 new messages. The first one that mattered was from Sarah Mitchell. It said, "Conference Room 4B, Terminal 2 Operations Wing. 40 minutes. I need you there." He typed back, "We'll be there." Lily looked at the message over his arm. "We're having a meeting?" "I'm having a meeting." "You said we." He looked at the message. He had said we. He hadn't thought about it. It had just come out, the instinctive plural of someone who had spent the entire morning refusing to operate in the singular. "You can wait in the room if you want," he said. "There's probably—" "I'm not waiting outside," Lily said flatly. "I was there for the beginning. I'm there for the middle." He thought about arguing. He decided against it. "Okay," he said. "But you listen. You don't talk. Unless I have something important to say." Lily. "Fine," she said. "I'll be quiet. But I'm coming." He nodded. The aircraft had come to a stop at the gate. Around them, the familiar percussion of a cabin preparing to exit, overhead bins opening, phones coming off airplane mode. The collective forward lean of people who were suddenly in a hurry after sitting still for 4 hours. The man from row 11, the Giants cap, the honest admission back at JFK, passed Daniel's row and stopped briefly. He looked at Daniel. "Good luck," he said. "Thank you," Daniel said. The man nodded once and moved on. It was not a big moment. It was the kind of small, real moment that gets lost in stories told afterward, because it does not fit neatly into any narrative arc. But Daniel cataloged it, the way he cataloged everything, not the details, but the weight of it. The fact that someone had said it. He needed those, today. He helped Lily get her bag from the overhead. He put on his backpack. He waited until most of the cabin had emptied, and then he walked off the aircraft with his daughter beside him, through the jet bridge, into the terminal, and into whatever came next. Conference room 4B was not a big room. It was the kind of space that exists in airport operational wings, everywhere low ceiling, fluorescent light, a table that had seen better decades, a whiteboard with residue from a previous meeting that hadn't been fully erased. There were 4 chairs on one side of the table and 2 on the other, and when Daniel and Lily arrived with 2 minutes to spare, 3 of the 4 chairs were already occupied. Sarah Mitchell was there. Beside her sat a man Daniel had not met, early 50s, a suit that fit well the precise posture of someone with a legal background. Beside him sat a woman with a laptop already open, fingers poised, the universal signal of someone whose job it was to record things accurately and completely. Daniel sat across from Sarah. Lily sat beside him and folded her hands on the table and looked at the whiteboard with the expression of someone who was absolutely going to be quiet. Sarah looked at Lily, then at Daniel. Something moved across her face, respect, maybe, or the particular recognition of someone who had not expected the 9-year-old to be relevant and was now recalibrating. "I'll keep this as efficient as possible," Sarah said. "I know you have." She glanced at Lily. "Other things on your schedule today." "We do," Daniel said. "But this matters. So let's do it right." Sarah opened a folder. She did not look at it yet. She looked at Daniel. "The record modification," she said. "Our IT team confirmed it 40 minutes ago. The change was made at 7:49 a.m., 12 minutes before the scheduled departure. The modification reclassified your reservation status from confirmed to voluntary reassignment. It was entered manually by Michael Reed using his supervisor credentials." Daniel said nothing. He had known this since the aircraft was still at the gate. But he let her say it. It was important that it be said out loud in a room by someone with the authority to act on it. "The modification was designed to look like a passenger-initiated request," Sarah continued. "If it hadn't been flagged, it would have appeared in our records as though you had voluntarily agreed to the downgrade." "Which I did not," Daniel said. "Which you absolutely did not," she confirmed. The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Richard Cahill, Senior Legal Counsel for the airline. I want to be transparent with you about where we are. What was done this morning constitutes a violation of federal passenger protection regulations, specifically the DOT rule prohibiting involuntary bumping without proper notification and compensation procedures. It also potentially constitutes falsification of a federal aviation record, which is a separate and significantly more serious matter." Daniel looked at him. "I know what it constitutes." Richard Cahill met his eyes. "I believe you do. What I want to know," Daniel said, "is whether this is the first time." The room shifted. It was a subtle shift, not movement exactly, but a change in the density of the air. The way a room changes when a question lands that everyone in it knew was coming, and nobody was quite prepared for anyway. Sarah said, "We've launched an internal review. That's not an answer, Daniel said. She held his gaze. No, she said, it's not. He waited. She took a breath. We've identified 14 incidents in the past 18 months that share similar characteristics. Confirmed reservation modifications. Passengers moved without documented operational cause. In 12 of those cases, the displaced passenger was downgraded. In 9 of those cases, the seat was reassigned to a passenger with VIP or premium status. The number sat in the room. Lily made a small sound beside Daniel, not a word, just an intake of breath, quickly controlled. He did not look at her, but he felt her stillness change quality beside him, from patient quiet to something more alert. 14. Not one incident with one supervisor on one bad morning. 14. Across 18 months, a pattern, a practice. Something that had been happening quietly and consistently in the spaces between the rules, enabled by the assumption that ordinary passengers would not fight back, would not know what to fight with, would accept being told they had agreed to something they had never agreed to. 14, Daniel said. At minimum, Sarah said. The review is ongoing. Richard Cahill interlaced his fingers on the table. Mr. Brooks, I want to be very clear that the airline is taking full responsibility for what occurred this morning and for any prior incidents that the review reveals. We are cooperating with the DOT. We have already suspended Michael Reed, pending investigation, and we are reviewing the records of every employee involved in today's incident. What about Victoria Harrington? Daniel said. A brief pause. Ms. Harrington did not modify the record herself, Richard said carefully. No, Daniel said. She didn't. But she requested the outcome that the modification was designed to produce, and she did so explicitly in front of witnesses after being told that the seat was legitimately assigned to another passenger. He paused. I want to know whether the airline considers that a relevant factor. Richard looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Daniel. We consider it very relevant, she said. Lily, who had been sitting with her hands folded and her eyes on the table with the rigid discipline of someone who had promised to stay quiet and was determined to honor that promise, even though it was costing her some, finally shifted in her chair. Daniel glanced at her. She looked at him. Her eyes said, "Can I say something?" He looked at her for a moment. Then, barely perceptibly, he nodded. She straightened. She looked at Sarah Mitchell with the directness of someone who had spent 40 minutes holding boarding passes in an airplane aisle and no longer had patience for indirection. What happens to them? Lily said. The 14 families. Do they know? Sarah looked at her, really looked at her. We're working on that, Sarah said. That's not the same as yes, Lily said. The room was very quiet. Daniel did not say anything. He did not need to. His daughter had just said the thing that needed to be said, and she had said it more clearly than he would have. Sarah Mitchell, who had been in this industry for 23 years and had sat across the table from people with far more leverage than a 9-year-old girl, said quietly, "You're right. It's not the same as yes, but it will be. I'm committing to that right now, in front of the person recording this conversation." She looked at the woman with the laptop. Make sure that's in the record. The woman's fingers moved. Yes, ma'am, she said. The meeting went on for another 38 minutes. By the end of it, 3 things had been agreed. The airline would individually contact every passenger identified in the 14 prior incidents. They would initiate a formal audit of all VIP accommodation practices for the past 3 years, and they would commission an independent review of their reservation modification protocols, specifically the security gaps that had allowed manual record changes to bypass the automatic alert system that Daniel's platform had built in. That last item was the one that sat heaviest with Daniel, because it meant there had been a gap in his system, in something he had built specifically to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation, not a gap he had designed. A gap that had been found and used and exploited quietly and consistently over 18 months by people who understood that if you entered a change in a specific way, through a specific interface, with specific supervisor credentials, the alert logic would treat it as a routine adjustment rather than an unauthorized modification. His CTO had flagged it to him in one of the messages on the plane. He had known then. He sat with it now. After the meeting ended, after Richard Cahill shook his hand, and the recording woman closed her laptop, and Sarah Mitchell walked them to the door, Daniel stood in the corridor outside Conference Room 4B, with Lily beside him, and felt something he had not expected to feel. Not anger. Not vindication, responsibility. The gap was his. It was in his code, his architecture, his system. Someone had found it and weaponized it. And that meant that all 14 incidents, all 14 families who had stood in an aisle with a legitimate boarding pass and been told they had agreed to something they hadn't, had happened, in part, because of a gap in the thing he had built to protect them. He had flagged it himself this morning. He had closed it. Remotely, from an airplane, while Lily slept against his arm. But he had not built it wrong. He had built it incomplete. There was a difference, but not enough of one. "Dad," Lily said. He looked at her. She was watching him with the expression she used when she could tell he was somewhere other than where his body was standing. "You're doing the thing again," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you blame yourself for something that was someone else's fault." He stared at her. "I don't," he started. "You do," she said. "It's the same face you made for 3 months after Mom got sick. Like if you had just done something differently, the outcome would have been different." She held his gaze. "Some things aren't your fault, Dad. Even when they happen to your stuff." He did not have a response to that. He had not had a response to it the 3 times she'd said versions of it in the past 2 years. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. "When did you get to be the parent?" he said. "About 1.5 years ago," she said. "You just didn't notice." He held her against his side for a moment in the corridor outside a conference room in an airport in a city where they had never been together before. While somewhere in the building, 3 separate investigations were beginning, and 14 families were about to receive phone calls, and one of the most powerful women in commercial real estate was on a rescheduled flight. Trying to remember how she had ended up saying sorry, he held his daughter and let the weight of the morning move through him and out the other side. Then he said, "Okay, we have the rest of the day." She looked up. "Really, really? What do you want to do?" She thought about it with total seriousness. "The bridge," she said. "The big one. I want to see it." "Golden Gate. Is it actually golden?" "It's more red." "Then why do they call it the Golden Gate?" "The strait it crosses was already called the Golden Gate." "Why?" "I'll tell you in the car." She considered this. "Okay," she said. "But I want sourdough bread too. I read that San Francisco has the best sourdough in the world." "You read that where?" "My book. The one about the girl with the rocket ship. She stops in San Francisco in chapter 7. He looked at her. "That's a very detailed book." "It's a very detailed author," Lily said. "Come on. Let's go." And they went. They spent the afternoon the way Daniel had planned it, unscheduled, unhurried, moving through the city at Lily's pace, which was the pace of someone encountering everything for the first time and absolutely refusing to rush through any of it. She ate sourdough bread at a small restaurant near the waterfront and declared it the best thing she had ever tasted. She stood at the railing above the bay and looked at the bridge for a long time without saying anything, which was unusual enough for Daniel to notice and unusual enough for him to not comment on. They walked. They talked about small things. They did not talk about the morning. But at some point, he couldn't have said exactly when, somewhere between the bread and the bridge, the morning stopped being the thing that was happening and became the thing that had happened. Past tense. The kind of past tense that doesn't mean finished, but means settled. Integrated. Part of the story rather than the whole of it. That was when his phone rang. The San Francisco number. The one from this morning that he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. He didn't. "This is Daniel Brooks." A pause. Then a woman's voice, precise, not warm, but careful. "Mr. Brooks. My name is Helen Park. I'm a reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm calling because I've received information suggesting there was a significant incident on a morning flight from New York this morning involving altered passenger records and a security breach. I've been told you were directly involved. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Daniel stood very still. Lily was looking at the bridge. She had her hands on the railing and her face turned into the wind. and she looked like someone standing at the edge of something enormous, which she was. "Miss Park," Daniel said. "Yes. How did you get this number?" "I'd rather not say. But I can tell you that the information I have is detailed and appears credible. I'm going to file the story regardless. I'm calling you because I believe you deserve the opportunity to be represented accurately." He thought about this. He thought about the 14 families. He thought about the gap in his system. He thought about Michael Reed and Brenda, and the quiet, consistent practice of making confirmed reservations disappear for the benefit of the people who paid the most. He thought about the fact that stories told publicly cannot be quietly buried by internal reviews and closed-door meetings and agreements that never reach the people who were most affected by what they were agreeing about. "Miss Park," he said. "Yes, how much time do you have this afternoon?" A brief pause. "As much as you need." He looked at Lily at the railing, at the bridge behind her, at the water below, wide and real, and not particularly interested in any of this. "Give me 45 minutes, he said. "Meet me at the ferry building. I'll tell you everything." He hung up. Lily turned from the railing. She had the look of someone who had only caught part of a conversation, but had caught enough. "Was that important?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Are you going to do something about it?" He looked at his phone. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the bridge. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded once, the decisive nod of someone who expected nothing less. "Okay," she said. "But can we finish the bread first?" He almost laughed. He caught it just before it got away from him, turned it into a smile instead, and held out his hand. She took it. They walked back toward the restaurant. And Daniel's mind was already 3 steps ahead in the meeting with the reporter, in the words he would choose and the ones he would refuse. In the specific and deliberate way he was going to make sure that what had happened on the flight from New York that morning did not become a story about a powerful man using his power. It needed to be a story about 14 families, about records that were supposed to protect people and had been used to erase them instead, about the specific and ordinary courage of standing in an aisle with a boarding pass and saying, "No, this is mine, and I am not moving." He knew how to tell that story. He had been living it for 20 years. He just had never needed to tell it out loud before. He was ready to now, and somewhere across the city, in a hotel room, where she had gone to reschedule her meetings and rebook her afternoon, and actually that had gone off its axis in ways she had not anticipated. Victoria Harrington was staring at her phone. She had 4 missed calls, 2 from her publicist, 1 from her attorney, and 1 from a number she recognized as one of her oldest professional contacts, a man who sat on the board of the airline, whose name had appeared in the credit roll of every charity gala she had attended for the past 12 years. He had not left a message. He had just called, and in Victoria Harrington's world, a call with no message from someone like that meant exactly one thing. It meant the story had gotten bigger than anyone planned. It meant that what had started as a seat on an airplane was now something that people with real power were paying attention to. And it meant that the 2 words she had said as she walked off, the plain words that had surprised her even as she said them, words she had replayed 6 times since, were not going to be enough. She knew that. She had known it the moment she said them. She looked at the 4 missed calls. She looked at the window. She picked up the phone and called her attorney first. Because Victoria Harrington had not survived 25 years in commercial real estate by being unprepared, and because she understood, with the same clarity that had made her successful, and the same blindness that had made her wrong that morning, that what was coming was going to require more than 1 phone call to manage. She just didn't know yet that what was coming could not be managed at all. Not in the way she was used to managing things. Not this time. Because Daniel Brooks had already spoken to Helen Park, and Helen Park had already filed her first paragraph. And the story was already moving. The story went live at 6:47 p.m. Pacific Time. Helen Park had not wasted a single minute of the 45 Daniel gave her at the ferry building. She had asked clean, direct questions and listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that the best stories were not built from quotes, but from the space between them, from what people said when they weren't thinking about how they sounded, from the weight behind the facts, from the thing that made an incident into something larger than itself. Daniel had given her the facts, all of them, not to be generous, not because he liked journalists, but because he had decided on the walk from the bridge to the ferry building that if this story was going to be told, it was going to be told completely. Not the version where a powerful man caught a bad employee doing a bad thing. The version where a system that was supposed to protect ordinary people had been quietly circumvented 14 times, and nobody had stopped it because nobody with the power to stop it had been paying attention. He had told her about the record modification, about the 14 prior incidents, about the gap in the security architecture that had allowed a manual override to pass undetected, about the families who had been displaced and had never been told that what happened to them was not a system error but a deliberate choice. He had not told her those families' names. He did not have them. The airline had those. He told her that too. Helen Park had a story. By the time Daniel and Lily got back to their hotel that evening, the article had been live for 9 minutes and had already been shared 400 times. Daniel knew this because his phone had not stopped since. He sat at the small desk while Lily ate room service pasta and watched a nature documentary about ocean animals, and he worked through the messages methodically. His communications director had already drafted 3 response statements and was waiting for his approval on one. His legal team had reviewed the article and confirmed that nothing in it was inaccurate or defamatory. His CTO had sent a technical summary of the security patch that had been deployed at 2:14 p.m. that day. The gap closed, documented, logged. He approved the first response statement. He sent the technical summary to the airline's integration team. He called his communications director for 4 minutes and said 6 things that mattered and nothing that didn't. Then he set the phone face down on the desk and turned around. Lily was looking at him over a forkful of pasta. "Is it bad?" she said. "It's loud," he said. "That's different from bad?" "Usually," he said. "Loud means people are paying attention." She considered this. "Is that what you wanted?" "I wanted the 14 families to hear what happened to them," he said. "Loud is how that works." She twirled pasta around her fork thoughtfully. "Are we going to be famous now?" "No," he said. "The article has your name in it. That doesn't make you famous. What does it make you?" He thought about it. "Accountable," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Is that a good thing?" "If you've done the right thing, yes," he said. "If you haven't, no. Have you done the right thing?" He held her gaze. "I think so," he said. "I'm trying to." She nodded once, the way she did when she had decided to accept an answer that wasn't complete but was honest. Then she turned back to her pasta and her ocean documentary, and a narwhal appeared on screen. And she said, "Oh wow," in a voice that had nothing to do with anything that had happened that day. And Daniel turned back to his phone. The next message he opened was from a name he had not expected to see. Victoria Harrington. Not her attorney, not her publicist. Her. The message was 4 sentences long. It read, "I spoke with my attorney this evening. He advised me not to contact you directly. I'm contacting you anyway. I would like to speak with you tomorrow, if you're willing." Daniel read it twice. He set the phone down. He picked it up again. He typed, 9 a.m. Hotel lobby. Bring whatever you need to bring. He set the phone down again and did not pick it up for 2 hours. By morning, the story had moved. Not moved the way stories move when they trend for a day and disappear. Moved the way stories move when they hit something real, when they land on a nerve that turns out to be connected to a larger system of nerves that people had not known were sensitive until something pressed them. The Chronicle article had been picked up by 3 national outlets by midnight. By 6 a.m. Pacific, it was on cable news. By 7 a.m., the DOT had released a statement confirming they were aware of the incident and reviewing the applicable regulations. By 7:43 a.m., the airline had issued its own statement, carefully worded, legally reviewed. Genuinely apologetic in the specific way that organizations are apologetic when they understand that the alternative to genuine apology is something much more expensive. Michael Reed had been formally suspended pending investigation. The statement confirmed. An independent audit had been commissioned. The airline was reaching out to affected passengers. At 7:51 a.m., a woman named Carol Simmons in Houston, Texas, posted on social media. She was 63 years old. She had been flying home from her daughter's wedding 18 months earlier when she was told her confirmed business class seat had been reassigned due to a system error and she would need to move to economy. She had cried in the aisle. She had accepted the downgrade because she was alone and frightened and nobody around her said anything. She had written a complaint to the airline and received a form letter and 200 miles of credit. She had not known until she read the Chronicle article at 6 a.m. over her coffee that there had been no system error. Her post had 12,000 shares by 9 a.m. By the time Daniel came down to the hotel lobby at 5 to 9, 3 more passengers from the 14 had been identified and their stories were circulating. None of them had been told the truth. All of them had been given operational explanations and token compensation, and the implicit understanding that what had happened to them was unfortunate but not wrongful. Victoria Harrington was already in the lobby. She was seated in a chair near the window. Not the kind of seated that means relaxed, but the kind that means she had arrived early and used the extra time to decide exactly how she was going to hold herself when he walked in. She was dressed conservatively dark blazer, no jewelry beyond the watch, which was always there, which was part of the architecture of her. She had her hands in her lap, and her posture was correct, and she looked like a woman who had made a decision and was committed to it and was not entirely sure it was the right decision, but was going to follow through anyway. Daniel sat across from her. He did not say good morning. Neither did she. She looked at him for a moment. "You gave the interview," she said. "I did. Your communications director didn't advise against it. She advised me to think carefully. And I thought carefully." Victoria looked at her hands. "My attorney told me the same thing about this meeting. To think carefully. To not have it." Daniel said nothing. "He's concerned about liability exposure," she said. "He thinks anything I say to you directly can be used to establish intent in whatever regulatory action follows." "He's probably right," Daniel said. She looked up. "And yet here I am. And yet here you are," he said. She was quiet for a moment. In the lobby around them, the ordinary life of a hotel morning continued, without interest in any of this, a family with luggage heading toward checkout. A businessman in a hurry toward the door. The distant sound of someone's phone ringing and being answered in a language. Daniel didn't speak. "I want you to know something," Victoria said. "And I want to be clear that I'm saying this without my attorney present and without any legal strategy behind it. I'm saying it because it's true and because I think it matters that someone says true things." He waited. She said, "What I did on that aircraft was wrong. Not complicated. Not nuanced. Wrong. I looked at you and I made a decision based on what I saw instead of what was real. And I used the influence I had to make that decision stick." She paused. "I've been in business for 25 years. I've prided myself on being someone who makes decisions based on facts. And in 3 seconds, looking at a jacket, I threw all of that out." Another pause. "I don't have an explanation for that. I have an observation, which is that it was easier to do than it should have been. And that tells me something about myself that I've been thinking about since yesterday morning." Daniel looked at her. He had prepared himself for several versions of this conversation. The version where she came with lawyers and leverage. The version where she came with a strategic apology designed to minimize damage. The version where she didn't come at all and sent a letter instead. He had not prepared for this. Not because it was unexpected exactly, but because sincerity has a specific texture that is very difficult to manufacture. And what he was hearing had that texture. "Why did you come here?" he said. She looked at him directly. "Because your daughter asked a real question in that conference room, and it deserved a real answer." He was quiet. "Lily asked what happens to the 14 families," Victoria said. She asked it like it was the only thing that mattered. and it is the only thing that matters. What I did made a mess that has your name on it, and the airline's name on it, and my name on it. But the people it actually hurt were people nobody knows. People who flew home and told their families something went wrong and never found out that wrong was an understatement. Daniel said, "What are you proposing?" She took a breath. "I've spoken with my team this morning. I want to establish a fund, not as a legal settlement separate from whatever the DOT process produces. A fund specifically for passengers who were displaced through record manipulation on any flight in the past 3 years. Not just this airline. I want to commission an independent audit across the industry." The lobby was quiet around them. Daniel looked at her for a long time. "That's a significant undertaking," he said. "I'm aware. It will draw more attention to what you did, not less. I know. Your attorney is going to tell you this is the worst possible decision from a liability standpoint." "He already did," she said. 40 minutes ago. I told him to prepare the paperwork anyway." He studied her. He was looking for the angle not because he was cynical, but because he was careful. And he had been in enough rooms with enough powerful people to know that generous gestures sometimes had architectures underneath them that were not visible from the front. He didn't find one. What he found was something simpler and more surprising. A person who had done something wrong and was trying to figure out what the doing right of it looked like. Not for the cameras or the story or the liability management, but because the alternative was living with it. He understood that. He had built a company around that exact impulse. "I'm not going to endorse your fund publicly," he said. She nodded. "I'm not asking you to, but I'm not going to oppose it." She held his gaze. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the 14 people who never got an explanation. If you want to do something useful, make sure they get one." She nodded. He stood. She stood. They did not shake hands. It was not that kind of moment. It was the other kind, the quieter kind, where something has been said that needed to be said, and both people in the room feel the slight shift of it, and then they go back to their separate lives carrying it with them. He walked toward the elevator. At the elevator, he stopped. He turned back. She was still standing there, watching him go. "Ms. Harrington," he said. "Yes, my daughter said something to me yesterday that I've been thinking about." He paused. "She said some things aren't your fault, even when they happen to your stuff." He held her gaze. "She's 9. She's smarter than either of us." Victoria Harrington looked at him. Something shifted in her face. "She sounds like her father," she said. "She sounds like her mother," Daniel said. And then he got in the elevator. The doors closed. He stood alone in the small moving space between floors and let out a breath he had been holding for approximately 22 hours. His phone buzzed. It was Sarah Mitchell. The message read, "DOT called this morning. They're opening a formal investigation. Not just this airline. Industry-wide review of reservation modification protocols. They want your technical documentation. Can you have it ready by Friday?" He typed back. "It's already written. I'll send it this afternoon." He got out on his floor and walked to the room. Lily was awake. She had ordered room service breakfast and was sitting cross-legged on the bed, eating toast and watching the news on the hotel TV, and the news was covering the story. She turned when he walked in. "Dad," she said, "we're on TV." "I know. Not us specifically," she clarified. "The thing that happened. I know. There's a woman, her name is Carol. She was on a flight 18 months ago, and they moved her, and she cried, and she didn't know it wasn't a system error." Lily's voice had gone careful and quiet the way it did when she was managing something that was affecting her. She cried on television. Just now. She said she thought it was her fault for not fighting back. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed. He and Lily both looked at the screen. Carol Simmons was 63, and she was composed, mostly, in the way that people are composed when they have been not posed enough already and have decided to put it away. She was talking about the flight, what it had felt like to be moved, to be told she had to accept it, to feel the shame of being the problem that needed to be resolved. She said she had not told anyone about it for 2 months. She said she had started to believe that she had misunderstood her own reservation. She said, "I should have known I was right, but they were so sure I was wrong." And when people with authority are sure you're wrong, eventually you start to wonder, Lily said very quietly. That's what you said to me. On the plane. Daniel looked at her. What? You said sometimes people make mistakes because they judge what they see before they learn the truth. She was still watching the screen. But she didn't make a mistake. They did. And she spent 18 months thinking she did. He did not answer right away. He looked at the screen. At Carol Simmons, who was 63 and had flown home from her daughter's wedding and cried in an aisle, and then spent a year and a half quietly doubting herself. He thought about the jacket. His jacket, the brown one with the faded elbow, the one he had worn because today was not a day for armor. He thought about what would have happened if he had been wearing the blazer instead, if he had looked like what he was before anyone asked, if he had come off that jet bridge in a suit and announced himself, and the whole morning had collapsed immediately, and Michael Ryde had apologized before the boarding pass was even checked. He thought about how that version of the morning would have meant nothing, would have changed nothing, would have been a problem smoothly handled and quickly forgotten. He had worn the jacket on purpose. He had not known consciously that he was making a choice. But some part of him had known that the test of a system is not how it treats the people who announce themselves. It is how it treats the people who don't. And his system had failed that test. Lily, he said. She looked at him. We're going to do something this afternoon, he said. Something I should have planned from the beginning. What? I want to find out if any of the 14 are here in San Francisco, or close, or if any of them want to talk. He paused. Not to the press, not to lawyers. To me. She looked at him steadily. Because Carol Simmons spent 18 months thinking she misunderstood her own reservation, he said. And she deserves to hear from me directly that she didn't. That what happened to her was wrong. That the record was changed. That it had nothing to do with her. That she was right and they were wrong, and the only system error was in the people operating the system. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Can I come? He looked at her. You can come, he said. She nodded. She reached over and picked up the remote and turned the TV off. She looked at her toast. She looked at Daniel. Dad, she said. Yeah. Mom would be really proud of you right now. He did not have an answer to that. So he did what he always did. When she said something that went all the way through him, he let it land, he let it stay. He did not try to make it into anything other than what it was. I know, he said. She picked up her toast. He picked up his phone and started making calls. By 2 that afternoon, he had spoken with 4 of the 14 passengers, directly. 3 had been found through the airline's outreach, which had begun that morning, in response to the DOT notification. 1 had found him a man named James Whitfield, 68, a retired teacher from Sacramento who had been separated from his wife of 40 years, on a flight to see their first grandchild born, who had been told the seat allocation was a technical error, who had never in 43 years of flying raised his voice or caused a scene, and who had gone quietly to high-assigned seat and sat there for 6 hours thinking about what he had done wrong. James Whitfield had read the Chronicle article at 5 a.m. He had not cried. He had told Daniel this directly, in the even voice of a man who had been managing his emotions about it for 18 months. He had read the article, and he had sat in his kitchen for a long time, and then he had called his wife into the room and read it to her out loud. And then he had cried. He told Daniel this simply, without apology. I just needed to know it wasn't my fault, James said. That's all. That's the only thing I needed. Daniel said, it wasn't your fault. What happened to you was wrong. The record was changed without authorization. You had every right to that seat. A silence on the line. Then thank you. 2 words. The weight of 18 months behind them. Daniel held the phone after the call ended and sat with it for a while. Lily was across the room, reading her book, the one about the girl with the rocket ship. Chapter 8 now. Deep into the territory she hadn't reached yet. She had been quiet through all 4 calls, sitting where she could see him, not listening specifically but present, in the way she had learned to be present when things mattered. She looked up. How many more, she said. 10, he said. That we know of. Are you going to call all of them? Yes, he said. Today. As many as I can reach. She looked at him for a moment. Then she held out her hand. In it was one of the granola bars from the backpack, the ones he had packed for her, at home, in the quiet of the early morning, before anything had happened. "You haven't eaten since breakfast," she said. He took the granola bar. "Thank you," he said. She went back to her book. He made the next call. By the time he finished the last one that evening, a woman named Patricia, 57, who had been moved from her seat on a birthday flight and had decided afterward to never fly that airline again, and had kept that decision for 14 months. It was nearly 7 p.m. and the story had done something he had not fully anticipated. It had grown a second layer. The first layer was the incident itself, the record modification, the investigation, the airline's accountability. That layer had been expected. He had helped build it deliberately when he spoke to Helen Park. The second layer was the one he had not controlled. It was the people: Carol Simmons, James Whitfield, Patricia, the birthday flight, 3 others who had spoken to reporters through the afternoon. Real people with real names and real stories, each of which was smaller than his no powerful revelation. No security architecture, no system flag, but each of which was, in its smallness, somehow larger. Because each of them was the same story told in a different voice. And the story was this: I was right, and I was made to feel wrong, and I said nothing, because I had nothing to fight back with, and I carried it. That story was older than the airline. That story was older than business class. That story was as old as the specific human practice of determining who has rights based on what they appear to have rather than what they actually possess. Daniel knew this. He had known it on the jet bridge, walking toward the seat with Lily's hand in his. He had worn the jacket because he wanted to know what it felt like to be Daniel Brooks without the announcement. He had wanted to know whether the system he had built would protect someone who had every right to be protected, but nothing visible to prove it. Now he knew, and now he was going to fix it. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the technical documentation for the security patch he had deployed at 2:14 p.m. the previous day. He added 3 sections he had been thinking about since the call with James Whitfield. He rewrote the section on manual override authorization to require a second factor confirmation for any record modification touching a confirmed booking. He added a passenger notification trigger, automatic, immediate, direct to the traveler's contact information anytime their reservation status changed after check-in. A change you didn't authorize would now tell you it had happened before you ever reached the gate. He worked for 2 hours. Lily fell asleep at 9, mid-chapter, the book tented on her chest. He kept working. At 11, he sent the updated documentation to his CTO with a note that said, "Deploy to all integrated airlines by end of week. This is not optional." His CTO replied in 4 minutes, already queued. "We were waiting for your sign-off." Daniel closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of the room with the soft sound of Lily breathing and the distant sounds of the city outside and the specific stillness of a night after a day that had been too large for one day to contain. He thought about Rachel. He thought about what she would say if she were here. She would say something practical first, something about getting enough sleep, about eating real food, about the fact that his ability to fix systems did not make him immune to the basic requirements of being human. Then she would say the other thing. The thing she always said when he had done something hard and right, and was sitting with the cost of it. She would say, "You're not finished yet." Not as a criticism, as a fact, as the specific encouragement of someone who understood that the work that mattered never had a clean ending, only the next beginning. He looked at Lily, sleeping with her rocket ship book on her chest. He looked at his phone. The notifications had not stopped. They probably wouldn't for several days. He looked at the closed laptop. He was not finished yet. He knew that. But tonight, for this one night, in this room, with his daughter breathing softly across from him, he had done enough. Tomorrow would require more. It always did. He turned off the light. He sat in the dark for a long time, not sleeping, just being still. And somewhere across the city, in the offices of 3 federal agencies, and 2 airline compliance departments, and 1 industry watchdog organization that had been watching reservation practices for years and waiting for exactly this kind of documented, Systemic. Undeniable evidence. The work was already continuing without him. The system was doing what he had built it to do. Protecting the people who needed protecting. Even while he slept. He woke at 5:47 a.m. without an alarm. That was how it always happened when something large was unresolved. His body made the decisions before his mind caught up, pulled him out of sleep while it was still dark outside, and the room was quiet, and the only sound Lily breathing from the other bed. He lay there for a moment, listening to her breathe, and then he sat up and reached for his phone. 41 new messages. He did not read them yet. He set the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed and let his eyes adjust and let the morning be a morning for 30 seconds before it became whatever it was going to become. Lily had not moved. She was on her back, with the rocket ship book still on the nightstand beside her, spine up, marked somewhere in Chapter 9. She had fallen asleep mid-story, 2 nights in a row now. He was going to have to take her to a bookstore before they flew home so she could finish the series. She would not be able to leave San Francisco without knowing how the girl's rocket ship ended up. He thought that. Then he thought about going home. Then he thought about the flight home. He picked up the phone. The first message that mattered was from Sarah Mitchell, timestamped 11:23 p.m. the previous night. It read, "DOT formal investigation confirmed. They're calling it a systemic review, not just an incident response. Your documentation was exactly what they needed. Also, the board met this afternoon. They voted to implement your updated security protocols across all operations by end of month. Not just our airline. They're recommending it as an industry standard. I thought you should know," he read it twice. Industry standard. Not a patch. Not a fix for the specific gap that had been exploited. A standard. The kind of thing that gets written into operational requirements and contract language and compliance checklists and training manuals. The kind of thing that means the next Michael Reed, wherever he works, whatever airline he supervises, whatever morning he decides that the wealthy passenger matters more than the confirmed one, will not be able to do what Michael Reed did without an immediate, automatic, irrevocable alert going directly to the passenger whose record he touched. Daniel set the phone down again. He sat with that for a while. Not with triumph. With something quieter and more durable. The feeling of a thing built correctly, finally doing the job it was built to do. Rachel had called it the guarantee. She had been right. The second message that mattered was from an RS he did not recognize, a personal email. Not a professional one, sent at 2:18 a.m. by someone who had clearly been awake much later than was good for them. The subject line said, "You don't know me, but I need you to know this." He opened it. The sender's name was Marcus Webb. He was 44 years old, he explained in the first line, and he had been one of the 14 passengers, and he had received the airline's call yesterday afternoon, and he had listened to the explanation, and he had said thank you and hung up, and then he had sat in his kitchen for 3 hours, and then he had written this email. He wrote that 18 months ago, he had been flying to his father's funeral. He had booked business class specifically because it was a 6-hour flight and he was already in pieces, and he needed the extra space, the extra quiet, the extra dignity of having somewhere to put himself that didn't require him to fold inward. When he was moved to a middle seat in economy, the flight attendant had told him it was a system error and offered him a drink voucher. He had taken the drink voucher. He had sat in the middle seat for 6 hours between 2 strangers, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, his father's eulogy on a folded piece of paper in his shirt pocket, and he had held himself together by sheer force of will, and he had arrived at his destination exhausted and hollowed in a way that the grief alone would not have made him. He had never told anyone that story. Not his sister. Not his wife, he told Daniel now. And at the end he wrote, "I'm not telling you this because I want anything. I'm telling you because I think you should know what the number 14 actually means. It's not 14 incidents. It's 14 mornings. 14 people trying to get somewhere that mattered. And every single one of them went alone." Daniel read the email. He read it again. He set the phone down on the bed beside him and sat very still and let Marcus Webb's words move through him, the way things move through you when they are entirely true and you have no defense against them. 14 mornings. Not 14 incidents. 14 mornings. 14 people on their way, somewhere, that mattered: a wedding, a grandchild, a funeral, a first flight with a 9-year-old daughter who had never seen the bay, and every single one of them had been quietly, efficiently, professionally told that their right to be where they were was contingent on whether someone more important needed the space. He typed a reply. It took him 20 minutes to write 4 sentences. He wrote, "Mr. Webb, I'm sorry for what happened to you on that flight and for what it cost you on one of the hardest days of your life. What was done to you was wrong, and you deserved better from a system that was supposed to protect you. Your father's eulogy deserved to be carried by someone with room to breathe. I'm going to make sure the next person in your seat has that. I promise." He sent it. He picked up his phone and looked at the remaining 39 messages, and for the first time in 2 days he felt something clarify inside him. Not the anger, which had never been the right fuel anyway, and not the vindication, which was too small a word for something this large, but the specific, clean, sustaining clarity of a person who knows exactly what they are doing and why they are doing it, and is no longer spending any energy on the question of whether it is worth doing. It was worth doing. It had always been worth doing. The only question had ever been whether anyone with the tools to do it would be willing to stand in the aisle long enough to make it happen. Dad. He looked up. Lily was awake. She was on her side, watching him from across the room with her hair loose around her face, and her eyes clear in the way eyes are clear at that hour when sleep hasn't fully lifted yet. "You've been up a while," she said. "A while," he said. "Bad news?" "Good news, the hard kind." She considered this. "There's a hard kind?" "The kind where something good happened, but it took something difficult to make it happen. And you're still carrying the difficult part, even though the good part is real." She was quiet for a moment. "Like when I made the honor roll last year, but it was because I stayed up until midnight 3 nights in a row and cried over the math test." He looked at her. "Exactly like that. You were up until midnight worried about me during that." "I was. And then you were proud when I made the list." "I was." "Both at the same time," she said. "Both at the same time," he said. She sat up, pulled her knees to her chest, looked at him with the particular morning directness that children have before the day has had time to teach them, to be careful about what they say. "Mom would have handled this differently," she said. "Not better. Differently." He waited. "She would have yelled," Lily said. "Not a lot. But at some point she would have said something really loud. She didn't like injustice. She got loud about it." A pause. "You got quiet, like really quiet. And somehow that was scarier." Daniel thought about Rachel, about the way she had thrown a water bottle at a wall once. Not at anyone, just at a wall. After a particularly bad meeting where someone had dismissed her competence with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. About the way she had said after, her breathing still uneven, hands shaking slightly, "I will not be managed." About the way those 4 words had been the most complete expression of herself he had ever witnessed. He thought about himself in the aisle of the aircraft, quiet still, certain. 2 different kinds of the same thing. "She would have gotten it done too," he said. "Yeah," Lily agreed. But her way was more satisfying to watch. He almost laughed. She did laugh, a short, bright sound that broke the early morning open. They ordered breakfast from room service and ate it on the beds, and watched 20 minutes of morning news that included a segment about the DOT investigation, during which Lily sat up straight and watched with the focused attention of someone watching something they were personally connected to, which she was. A legal analyst on the screen used the phrase systemic culture of passenger discrimination, and Lily repeated it under her breath with the air of someone filing it for later. "Systemic culture of passenger discrimination," she said. "Yeah, is that what it was? It's what happens when you make a decision enough times that it stops being a decision and becomes a practice," he said. "When the wrong thing gets comfortable enough that people stop noticing it's wrong." She thought about that. "Like how our neighbor parks in the fire lane every morning." Exactly like that. But bigger. Much bigger. She looked at the screen. "So what stops it?" "Someone noticing," he said, "and refusing to accept it as normal." She looked at him. "You noticed." "You noticed too," he said. You ask the question in the conference room that nobody else asked. She looked at the TV. Her expression did something complicated, not pride, not embarrassment, something in between. The expression of someone who has been told they mattered in a moment they remember clearly but didn't know they were being seen in. I just said what was obvious, she said. Obvious thing is always the hardest to say, he told her. That's why so few people say it. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then she said, "Can we go to the bookstore now?" He set down his coffee. "Let's go to the bookstore." They were out the door by 9. The bookstore was the kind of San Francisco institutions that had survived several decades and 3 neighborhood transformations by being genuinely good at what it did, which was knowing books and knowing the people who needed them. Lily moved through it with the contained intensity of someone who takes this kind of place seriously. She found the 3rd and 4th books in the Rocket Ship Ocean series within 4 minutes, which Daniel considered impressive navigation. She also found 2 other books she had not been looking for but clearly needed, and she carried all 4 to the register with the purposeful expression of someone conducting essential business. The man at the register was older, late 60s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. The easy manner of someone who had been watching people come through this door for a long time and had decided he liked most of them. He looked at the books. He looked at Lily. "Good choices," he said. "Thank you," Lily said. "The first 2 I've already started. The 3rd one I haven't, but I'll need it before the flight home. Long flight, 5 hours. I read fast." He smiled. "Good habit." He began ringing up the books. He glanced at Daniel, just a brief, ordinary glance. The kind of glance you give the adult accompanying a serious-minded child in a bookstore. Then he stopped. He looked more carefully. "Excuse me," he said. I'm sorry? This is probably, are you the man from the news? The airline story?" Daniel said. "Yes." The man at the register looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Lily. He set down the book he was holding. "My granddaughter was on that flight," he said. "Not yours. A different one. 3 years ago. She was 7. They separated her from her parents." His voice was even but careful. The voice of someone who has practiced saying a thing out loud until they can say it without breaking. She was 7 years old, and she sat alone for 40 minutes before they figured out the error. He paused. "They told my daughter it was a system error. She believed them." The store was quiet. Lily was looking at the man, not with discomfort, with the full, direct, open attention she gave to things that deserved it. Daniel said, "I'm sorry. That should never have happened to her." The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "My daughter heard about what you did. She called me last night. She was." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He started again. "She said she finally understood. It wasn't her fault for not fighting harder. That the system was designed to make her feel like it was." Daniel nodded. "It was," he said. "And I'm fixing that. Not just for what happened this week. Going forward. The alert system, the authorization protocols, no passenger will have their reservation touched after check-in, without an immediate notification. It's being deployed now." The man at the register looked at him with an expression that took a moment to identify because it was not a common thing to see on a stranger's face. It was relief. Not gratitude exactly. Not admiration. Relief. The specific relief of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has just been told that the cause of the thing is being addressed. "Good," he said. He cleared his throat. He picked up Lily's book again. "Good," he finished, ringing up the purchase. He put the books in a bag. He handed it to Lily with both hands. "Take care of yourself," he said to her. "You too," she said. They walked out into the morning. Lily held her book bag in both hands and walked beside Daniel, and after a few steps she said, very quietly, "That keeps happening." "What does?" "People telling you things. Real things. That they haven't told other people." He looked at her. "Because they didn't have anyone to tell," he said. "Until now." She thought about that for the rest of the block. The flight home was 2 days later. They spent the intervening time in an uncomplicated way, seeing the city, eating the food, doing the things that had always been the point of the trip. They went back to the bridge. They went to the farmer's market at the ferry building. where Lily spent 45 minutes, things and 17 on Daniel's money on a jar of honey she declared was the best honey she had ever tasted. They went to a baseball game, not because either of them was especially invested in the teams playing, but because Lily had read
Yes.
the San Francisco game was an experience, and she wanted the experience. It was. She ate a hot dog. She cheered at moments that Daniel could not always explain. She kept score in a small notebook she had bought at the bookstore in the margins of a receipt, which was not how scorekeeping was supposed to work, but which she executed with total conviction. They did not talk about the case constantly. They talked about it when it came up naturally, which it did, because the world was talking about it, and the world followed them wherever they had their phones. But they also talked about other things, about the rocket ship girl, who Lily finished in the hotel room on the second night and announced had one of the best endings she had ever read, about Rachel, about a trip they had taken, the three of them, when Lily was 4, to a beach in North Carolina where the water was too cold and the sand was too hot and it rained the second day, and Rachel had declared it the best vacation she had ever been on because it was imperfect in all the right ways. About what came next. On the second evening, sitting at a small table at a restaurant near the hotel, Lily looked at Daniel over a bowl of clam chowder and said, "Are you going to change how you travel?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you going to announce yourself now? Before you sit down anywhere? So this doesn't happen again?" He thought about it. He thought about the jacket. He thought about Marcus Webb and his father's eulogy, folded in a shirt pocket. He thought about Carol Simmons, who had cried in an aisle and spent 18 months blaming herself. He thought about James Whitfield, 68, who had never in 43 years raised his voice or caused a scene, and had gone quietly to a middle seat, and spent 6 hours wondering what he'd done wrong. He thought about what Rachel had said about the guarantee. "No," he said. Lily tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because that's not the answer," he said. "The answer isn't that I announce myself. The answer is that the system works whether I announce myself or not." He paused. "The jacket stays." She looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she said. She went back to her chowder. He watched her and thought about what kind of person his daughter was becoming, and felt a specific, clear, uncomplicated pride that was the cleanest emotion he had experienced in a long time. The morning of the flight home, Daniel's phone rang at 7:15 a.m. He saw the name and answered immediately. It was Richard Cahill, the airline's senior legal counsel. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. I wanted to reach you before you departed." His voice was formal, but not stiff, the voice of someone delivering information they consider significant. "The DOT has finalized its formal inquiry parameters. The investigation will cover all major carriers operating in the domestic market, reservation modification protocols, involuntary reassignment practices, VIP accommodation procedures. Full scope. 3-year look-back." Daniel said, "How many airlines?" "All of them," Richard said. "Every carrier with more than 1 million annual passengers." "And the new protocols?" "The DOT is recommending your updated security architecture as the baseline standard. They're calling it the Brooks Protocol in the preliminary documentation." A pause. "I thought you should know that before you read it somewhere." Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed. "The Brooks Protocol." He said nothing for a moment. "Mr. Brooks, I'm here," he said. "I appreciate you telling me." "There's one more thing," Richard said. "The passenger Marcus Webb, you corresponded with him?" "I did. He contacted us yesterday. He's waiving any compensation claim. He asked instead that his case be included in the DOT documentation as a formal example. He wants what happened to him on record." A pause. He said, "He wants the next person going to a funeral to have room to breathe." Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. "Make sure it's in the record," he said. "It will be," Richard said. The call ended. Daniel sat with the phone in his hand, and the morning quiet around him, and the specific weight of a thing that had begun as a seat on an airplane, and had become, somewhere between the jet bridge and this hotel room in San Francisco, something large enough to have a name. The Brooks Protocol. Rachel would have hated that name. She would have said, "It's not the Brooks Protocol. It's the you should have done this years ago protocol." He almost laughed. He did laugh, quietly, to himself, in the empty morning before Lily woke up. And then he picked up the phone and called his CTO and said, "Make sure the deployment documentation reflects that the passenger notification system is the core of it, not the security architecture. The notification. The part that tells a person their reservation was touched. That's the thing that matters. Make sure that's what people understand," his CTO said, already on it. "Good," Daniel said. "Thank you." He hung up and started packing. They took a cab to the airport. Lily had her book bag on her lap, the new books, plus the rocket ship series, plus the honey. She had wrapped carefully in a sweater, because she did not trust it in checked luggage. She read for the first half of the ride. Then she looked up and watched the city pass, and then she looked at Daniel. "I'm glad we came," she said. "Me too. Even with everything. Especially with everything," he said. She thought about that. "That's the complicated kind of glad." "Yes. Mom's kind." He nodded. She looked out the window again. At the airport, they moved through the terminal with the easy familiarity of people who have navigated this airport at least once already. Lily knew where the good bathrooms were. She knew which line moved faster at security. She walked with a confidence she had not quite had 4 days ago, not arrogance. Nothing like that. Just the quiet self-possession of someone who has been through something and come through it and knows, in the way that only experience teaches you, that they are capable of the next thing. At the gate, Daniel bought 2 coffees and a hot chocolate, and they sat in chairs near the window, and Lily opened book 3 of the rocket ship series, and Daniel looked at his phone and then set it face down on his knee because he had already done the things that needed doing, and the next hour was not for the things that needed doing. It was for this, for sitting beside his daughter at a gate in San Francisco, while the ground crews moved outside, and the morning light came through the windows, and somewhere in the background a departure board clicked through its updates. A woman a few seats down was trying to manage a toddler, and a stroller and a carry-on that kept toppling, and Daniel watched her for a moment, and then stood up and went over. "Can I give you a hand?" She looked up, startled, then grateful. "Oh, if you don't mind, yes, the strap on this thing keeps..." He fixed the strap. He took the carry-on and hung it properly on the stroller frame. It took 45 seconds. "Thank you so much," she said. "Of course," he said. He went back to his seat. Lily had watched this over the top of her book. She said, "You do that a lot." "Do what?" "Help people when you don't have to." "Everybody has to," he said. She considered this. "I don't think everybody thinks that." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters when someone does." She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her book. The gate agent called boarding. They stood. Daniel shouldered the backpack, the same one. The medical folder still in it. The granola bars. The thermos long since empty but still there because he had not gotten around to taking it out. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the gate. He thought about 5 days ago, about walking onto a different aircraft at a different gate with the exact same backpack and the exact same jacket, and the specific ordinary hope of a man who had bought 2 seats and was going somewhere with his daughter and expected nothing more complicated than a flight. He had gotten something more complicated than a flight. He had gotten 14 mornings made visible. He had gotten Marcus Webb's father's eulogy. He had gotten a system that would now protect 1,000 future Marcus Webbs before anyone had to sit in a middle seat at the worst moment of their life and wonder what they had done wrong. He had gotten his daughter standing in a conference room, saying the thing that needed to be said with the clarity of someone who had not yet learned to be careful about what she said. He had gotten the kind of week that changes the shape of the next 10 years. Lily was already at the gate agent, showing her boarding pass with both hands, the way she always did, the way she had done at JFK 4 days ago. That particular pride of a child presenting an important document, the boarding pass that said, "I have a right to be here. This is mine." The gate agent smiled at her. Lily smiled back. They walked down the jet bridge. Seats 4A and 4B. First class. This time, Sarah Mitchell had arranged it, quietly and without ceremony, as part of the airline's acknowledgement of what had happened. Daniel had started to decline and then stopped himself because Lily had not yet experienced a real pillow on an airplane, and he had made a claim about that at a cafe at JFK 5 days ago that he intended to keep. When they found their seats, Lily sat down and immediately touched the pillow. She looked at Daniel. "Real," she confirmed. "Told you," he said. "You said you thought they were real. I had a strong feeling." She settled into the seat with the particular satisfaction of someone arriving somewhere they fully deserved to be, and opened her book and began to read. Daniel sat beside her. He looked at the seat. His seat. Confirmed. Reserved. Protected by a system that would now alert him the moment anyone attempted to change it. A system that would do the same for every other passenger on every other airline that operated within the regulatory framework the DOT was even now finalizing. A framework built in part on documentation that bore his name. Documentation that traced its origin to a Tuesday morning when a man in a worn brown jacket had walked onto an aircraft with his daughter and refused to move. He put the backpack under the seat in front of him. He straightened up. He looked out the window at the tarmac, where the ground crews were going about their work with the same unhurried efficiency they always had. The same orange vests, the same flat sky, a different coast, but the same specific ordinariness of a morning that looked like any other morning and had no idea it was the morning after something had changed. He thought about Rachel one more time. He thought about what she would say if she were in the seat on the other side of Lily, looking at him over their daughter's head. He knew exactly what she would say. She would say, "Good. Now don't stop." He wouldn't. He looked at Lily, reading her book with both feet up on the seat, completely at ease, completely herself, completely unaware that she had spent the last 4 days being the most important person in a story that would affect thousands of people she would never meet. He looked at the engines beginning to turn. He felt the aircraft move. He thought about the 14 mornings, and the Brooks Protocol, and Marcus Webb's father's eulogy, and Carol Simmons crying on television, and James Whitfield calling his wife into the kitchen at 5 a.m., and the man at the bookstore, and the 2 words spoken by a woman in an ivory blazer who had been wrong in the specific way that powerful people are wrong when they have been powerful for too long without anyone saying no. He thought about all of it. And then he let it go, not forgotten, not abandoned, but settled into the past where it could do its work from a distance. And he turned to the window and watched his city fall away beneath him. And he was just a man on a plane, going home with his daughter, which was all he had ever wanted to be. The jacket was still on. It would stay on. Because the measure of any system, any rule, any guarantee, any promise made by one person to another, across the specific and ordinary distance of human difference, is not how it performs when the powerful announce themselves. It is how it holds when they don't. Daniel Brooks had built that system. He had worn the jacket to test it. He had stood in the aisle to prove it. And now, at 37,000 feet, with his daughter beside him, and the country spread below him, and 4 days of hard, real, consequential work already beginning its slow conversion into something permanent, he knew, with the complete and unshakable certainty of a person who has done the right at the right cost, that the system would hold. Not because of his name, not because of his power, but because it was built correctly. And a thing built correctly, for the right reason, by someone who understood what it needed to protect that thing, does not break easily. It stands. It holds. It keeps its promise, even when nobody important is watching. Especially then.